Good day. Welcome to the Corey Morgan Show. Thank you for tuning in. Spring is finally sprung. It's beautiful outside there. It's put me in a good mood. And I mean, it's me in a good mood. So I'll still be sour, cynical, crabby, and calling out politicians for the fools they are. But that's my job, and I enjoy doing it. My happy place looks grouchy to other people. But I assure you, I'm feeling warm inside today. And it's warm outside finally. So good. I can't stand winter. Never learned to like it. Right, lots to cover today. As always, lots going on. Later on, I'm going to have a guest on Calgary-Lougheed MLA Eric Bouchard, and we're going to talk about how COVID policies really messed with small businesses, and actually they still are messing with them today. We're still dealing with the fallout from government intervention and meddling around and just making a mess of commerce and people trying to make a living during that period of time of the COVID nightmare we all lived through. So that'll be an interesting conversation. I see you coming in there. Be sure to use the comment scroll, guys, the show for you who are watching it live. I like seeing that interaction. Send questions my way, my guests' way. I see them all. I don't necessarily read them all out, but it's appreciated, and discuss with each other on things. Just keep things civil. All right. Let's get on to what's got me wound up a bit today. And that's just in light of watching all these spending announcements. The Trudeau government, Trudeau's bouncing around, handing money out left, right, and center. Of course, not his money, our money. And a culture of corruption and entitlement is always going to develop within a government if it's been in power for too long. This is a law that's as immutable as that of gravity, especially when within a governance system like Canada's, which has little to no provisions for accountability or transparency between elections. And this issue isn't even a left or right one. This happens with governments of all ideological leanings. I mean, conservative governments have dealt with corruption as well. Opportunists and grifters don't have political ideologies. Their only allegiance is to themselves and their wallets, and they'll attach themselves to any government or bureaucracy if they see opportunities for personal gain. The longer an administration remains in power, the more entrenched these corrupted parasites are going to become, and the cozier they get with senior bureaucrats and ministers within the government. Inside dealing and influence peddling becomes endemic, and the participants don't think twice about siphoning off tax dollars for themselves and, of course, their friends. The crooks robbing taxpayers, they rarely directly embezzle from the government. Their methods usually involve sole-sourcing government contracts with high payments and low expectations of productivity, if indeed there's any expectations of productivity at all. I mean, the Arrive scam app scandal is a perfect example. Tens of millions of tax dollars funneled to a number of companies to create an app that works terribly and could have been created for a few $100,000. Two grifters working from a garage with no qualification to create apps somehow managed to get these contracts. And while it's now been exposed, it's doubtful that anybody's ever going to be held accountable. The contract recipients are stonewalling. The bureaucrats involved have already been covering things up. And the government, of course, has no appetite to see this crime investigated any further. The Arrive scam app, that's just one of hundreds of contracts that the federal government gives out. We've barely seen the tip of the iceberg of how badly Canadian tax dollars are being abused, and things are going to become a whole lot worse. You see, the Trudeau government's taken a sharp shift in strategy lately. I mean, they had been trying to maintain their hold on power through increasing authoritarianism through the years. They hoped if they could control the media and internet communications enough, they'd be able to save themselves from an eventual electoral loss. I think reality has sort of sunk in. Their strategies failed as Liberal support's hitting record lows no matter what the government tries. They know they're going to lose the next election. So now the Liberal government has embraced the tactic of massive spending increases, and that's to serve two purposes. Since they know they can't win the next election, they're going to salt the earth as heavily as they can to sabotage the next government. Increasing spending is easy. Cutting spending is difficult, and they know that. If and when the next federal government starts to cut into federal spending programs, the people who've become dependent on those programs will become hysteric, and the Liberal Party will use that to play up the heartlessness of the Conservatives. I'm sure legacy media will dutifully do their role as well. Those nasty Conservatives cutting all those programs. So Trudeau's entrenching all those programs right now, and they're going to be a problem later. So they're looking far ahead, and they're hoping they can create the circumstances where it's only going to be one election cycle in the political wilderness for the Liberals. The other reason they're releasing all these new spending programs is even more odious. And it's more odious than trying to win the election down the road. They're feathering the beds of themselves and their connected friends before they head out the door. You see, the larger the spending program and the vaguer the mandate the program is, the easier it'll be to abuse it. Now think about it. Trudeau's announcement of spending $2.4 billion to help develop Canada's AI industry is a perfect example. Hundreds of contracts are going to be going out worth millions of dollars, handed out with little oversight and no way to measure if they're achieving a tangible goal that benefits citizens. Rest assured, there's countless government insiders right now creating companies with AI development in the company description in anticipation of getting these juicy handouts. It's going to be impossible to sift through them all to find out which, if any, of the contractors are legitimate, which is, of course, the intent. I mean, just barrage the money in there and don't worry, people won't see the millions going out the door. I mean, this is a government that spent $45 million on a gun buyback program that didn't manage to buy a single gun. Does anybody really believe this administration can effectively control the evolution and development of artificial intelligence? They don't even have intelligence in the Prime Minister's office as it is. They sure as hell aren't going to make an artificial one. The announcements have been coming hot and heavy, and they're facing little scrutiny, of course, from the legacy media outlets who themselves have become dependent on these handouts. The Trudeau government's swirling the drain, but the unprincipled parasites attached to it will be filling their pockets as fast as they can in the next 18 months or so. Strap in, folks. It's going to get worse, and Canada is broken. All right. That's what's got me wound up today, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to get me wound up. Since Dave's still languishing somewhere down south, hiding by a pool or at some market or doing whatever Dave thinks Dave does, we got Sean Polzer standing in to give us an update on what's topping the news today. Hey, Sean, thanks for coming in today and letting us know what's up out there. So what's heading the news up in the Standard today?
Well, we got a lot of kind of interesting things today. It's not a horribly busy news day, but the things that are happening are quite substantial in their own way. So we've got the election inquiry is happening in Ottawa, election interference by China, Pakistan, and India, and others, a whole cast and crew. And CSIS is saying that Trudeau knew of an existential threat to Canadian democracy, despite his protestations otherwise. So that's kind of one of our lead stories right now. Bank of Canada held the line on interest rates at 5%, as we expected that they would. But the question is, when can we expect to see some rate cuts? And even though the bank said that the conditions are becoming more and more favorable, some of these inflation numbers out of the U.S. kind of suggest that otherwise it might be a while in coming, because Canadian interest rate cuts are usually predicated on what happens with the U.S. Because if we start cutting too soon, then our dollar will go down, and that will in turn fuel more inflation. So it's kind of a catch-22. We've got another exclusive about the Nenshi NDP leadership campaign. Liberals, Kent Fair has been doing some fundraising for him. There's some rumors that Calgary MP George Call is involved in trying to get Nenshi into the top chair with the NDP. Randy Bossonette is denying any involvement, but it all points to a Liberal Party takeover of the provincial NDP and all but names. So it's kind of a backdoor campaign. Calgary police are investigating a shooting in Highwood in Northwest that happened actually not that long ago, about 11 this morning. So that's kind of ongoing. The fellow who led the Recall Gondek campaign, I know that you and Landon are on some pretty good terms.
Well, we have no terms. I mean, I don't know. I tried to talk to him twice. He kept standing me up.
Anyway, now he's going after Peter Demong, who's his counselor in Ward 14. There was a meeting about the blanket rezoning proposed bylaw that the city of Calgary is doing, and Landon showed up with about 200 of his best friends to tear Demong down and give him a piece of their mind. And I guess there was some tensions, although it seemed to be relatively peaceful. And finally, we've got a column from Paul Forseth about addicts using opioids in BC hospitals. You're not allowed to smoke cigarettes. You're not allowed to have weapons. You're not allowed to do a lot of things in the hospitals, but apparently you can use illegal opioid drugs.
Well, that's in keeping with a lot of drug policy these days. I mean, I've said that before. You know, when people are riding the train or whatever, I mean, if you see somebody smoking meth or shooting heroin on the seat across from you in the train, don't call police or anything and say that, because they don't care. They won't do anything. You tell them they're smoking a cigarette, and they will have 6 people in there tackling that guy, throwing him off of that platform faster than you can say booze.
And fining him $3,000 or $4,000.
Yeah, and I wish it was a joke. It's brutal. Even in hospitals now, this bizarre enablement cult in BC is just I mean, you can't self-administer any of the other drugs in the hospital while you're there. You're probably there because you took too many of the other ones in the first place.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a new form of MAID.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
All right. Well, lots to cover. Always lots
And
going on.
we'll say hello to Dave if he's out there.
Yeah, Dave. See, he's doing a good job. We might not need you when you get back. All right. Well, thanks for the update, Sean. I guess we're going to see you on the pipeline later on tonight as well. And we'll hash out a lot more of these news issues in detail.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Right on. Thanks. Bye. All right. So that is our business, energy, and general reporter and journalist, Sean Polzer. He prolifically writes and covers a lot of those things you'll see on there. This is the time I like to remind everybody the reason Sean gets his bills paid and the rest of us do, and we can have this show, is because you guys have subscribed. So we really appreciate that. But this is where I got to nag and remind you, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, guys, come on, get on board. westernstandard.news/subscription, $9.99 a month, $100 for a year. Hey, volume discounts. It's a good way to go. I mean, I know people are getting used to new media. Things change, and it just seems odd paying for content. But we got to remember, it wasn't that long ago. For those of us who are gray enough to remember anyways, we never thought twice about paying to have newspaper subscriptions or things like that. And it was in the price level of what we're talking about now. $10 a month. You get past the paywall. It keeps our reporters running. It keeps this show running. And it keeps us as an independent news outlet. We aren't taking subsidies and tax dollars as the other ones are. We proudly keep saying that. And it shows. I mean, come on. I'm going to, after I get finished with my next guest, I'm going to talk a little bit about CTV and their latest bit of brilliance and seeing, again, one of these bailout networks and what they do. So if you've subscribed already, thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, guys, get on there, take one out. It's really appreciated, and it really helps us along. Okay, well, I see our guest is in the lobby already, so if he's ready to roll, I'm going to pull him in. And it is Eric Bouchard. He's the MLA for Calgary-Lougheed. And we're going to talk a bit about, business in Alberta and how it's, I guess, was suffering through COVID and is still suffering post-COVID. Hi, Mr. Bouchard. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Corey? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I know you got some busy times in the legislature. I'll lay off on bothering you with the million of other questions of what you guys are doing up there right now. We'll stay focused on the business issue that's going on right now. I guess for people unfamiliar with you, before you came into the legislature a year ago, you were a small business person in Calgary.
Indeed, yes. I was a small business owner. I started a small business in 2004, expanded to, it was essentially a cafe to a full service restaurant, expanded in 2010, expanded again 2015. Our latest expansion was a little market on our plus 15 level. We opened in January of 2020, and we had 10 weeks of phenomenal sales. Things were going through the roof after 4 really difficult years from 2015 to 2019, and then unfortunately forced to shut down, as many businesses were. We suffered the pains that all small business that were forced to shut down went through. We tried to reopen when we were allowed to reopen. Being in the downtown core, there weren't any people. Everyone was working from home, so we didn't really have an option. So we stayed closed, and then a couple of years later, I was done. We couldn't make it anymore. Gave the keys away, and then that's what pretty much got me into doing what I'm doing now as the MLA for Calgary-Lougheed. I just felt there was no representation for small business, and I think it was in 2020. Early 2022, I sent out an email to some small business owners trying to mobilize, trying to get together. We didn't have a voice, in my opinion. So we started off with 8 of us the first week. And then I think there's a group of roughly over 100, 110 guys that still get together on a weekly basis. And they asked me in December of 2022 if I would consider 2022, if I'd consider running. At the point I was at, that summer I was working at a golf course. I was 51 years old, did the first resume of my life, and I thought I would continue, working at a golf course until retirement. But 2 days prior to being asked if I would run, I was served by the Bank of Montreal for the loan that was outstanding that I had to pay back, and didn't have any way of paying it back anymore because my business was closed. So I decided, why not run? And here I am today.
Yeah, well, and it's a valid point. Like a lot of people, and I don't blame them for wanting to just not think about the pandemic anymore. And I think it's behind us and it's over. But for a lot of people, it's not over yet. Like there's a lot of businesses, of course, that suffered dearly during the pandemic, really personally leveraged themselves a lot. And they're still either, they've potentially gone broke, or they're still treading water today to try and catch up on the, for the financial beating they took over those few years where they weren't allowed to do business.
Correct. No, the last week I was home in the constituency, and it's always great to be home and meet with constituents and small business owners, but they're still feeling the effects. And I mean, from our side, all levels of government, we haven't done small business justice, in my opinion, and we're making strides. They're slow, as everything seems to be in government. But I met with one small business owner a week ago, and she switched her beer provider to save a penny a pint. Put that in perspective. That's how tight the margins are at even good times. The hospitality industry, the margins are difficult when things are good. But she switched to save a penny a pint. And, she can no longer take advantage. The food service companies that deliver, they're fantastic, but they, every cost has to be passed on. So she is relegated to Walmart, Costco, Superstore now to pick up, things that are maybe, 5 cents a pound cheaper just to keep the doors open.
Oh, I know it all too well. I mean, I owned a pub for 5 years just prior to the pandemic hitting. I couldn't imagine since. And there's the whiplash effect of all of these things coming down the line. I mean, our economy's been disrupted. The federal government, every level of government started spending and borrowing like mad, which led, of course, to inflation. And then you're forced to raise prices, and people are tight for funds. And one of the first things you cut if you're on a tight household budget is, we used to go out for supper once a week. Maybe it's going to be once every second week now because we just can't afford to anymore. And businesses are really feeling that today. I mean, the only business I see booming is dollar stores. Boy, they're springing up everywhere. Good on them. But it's because people can't afford to shop anywhere else.
No, it's so true. And I've, I feel all levels of government, the people who were in charge, I guess, from the advocacy for small business, which should have been there in 2020 and 2021, wasn't there. They, in my opinion, I believe it was I'll get a direct quote from the president of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. They say they exist to help businesses reach their potential. And as an independent nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, they build their history to serve and advocate for business of all sizes and all sectors across the country. And I'm going back to would have been 2021, the president of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, her comments were, today's announcement on the immediate removal of all pandemic measures and restrictions ignores the importance of consumer confidence in our economy recovery. Put that in perspective. Their role was to represent businesses, clearly veering out of their lane.
Yeah, and just for context, that's Deborah Yedlin, and I've written a couple of columns ripping into her. For that in particular, I was furious because, no matter where you stand on things, if you know anything about business, that those restrictions were harming businesses. They were slowing people down from coming into them. It was limiting the amount of people who could dine there, who could work there. The vaccine passports were reducing your customer base. Again, to come out and say that it would be bad for business to lift those restrictions was completely absurd and contrary to what any person in business would have told otherwise. Yet she's still heading that Chamber of Commerce today. And the the Western Standard, just as a side note before I let you go, we're a member of the Strathmore Chamber of Commerce because we just don't want to waste our time and money on the Calgary one, because it's just the chamber of woke.
Yeah, no, so fair. I appreciate that too. Just for another, I used corporate media, I believe it was 2017 or 2018, when times were tough, the NDP government, there's oil recession. I used one of the corporate media to get my message out how small businesses were affected. 2020, late 2020, I had reached out to all corporate media, and I won't name them all here, but each one responded saying that they weren't interested in telling my story at the time. And I was, wasn't waving the white flag just yet, but there was a tsunami coming of small businesses, and we haven't even scratched the surface, I don't think, of bankruptcies, insolvencies. We could go on talking about mental health issues and how small business owners are proud people, as they should be, but when you have to put up this facade for your staff, for your family, and just to keep the sense that everything is okay, and that I can speak personally to that. There's a mental toll to that.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting. I mean, you've got a sense of responsibility, as you said, to yourself, to your staff. You don't want them to know necessarily how close to the line you might actually be. It's horrifying to have to lay people off if they're dependent on that income. And it breaks people down. Insolvencies in Canada, I believe in January of this year, went up over 40% in 1 month. A part of that was all the CEBA loans suddenly were due to be paid in, which was, I guess, I mean, it's just chicken and egg. It was a good program if you could make it through. It's an interest-free loan with a forgivable piece within it. But if the government hadn't shut everybody down in the first place, you wouldn't have needed it.
Agreed. Yeah. And they, the CEBA loan, what people fail to really understand, my own personal experience, our rent was $17,500 a month. We borrowed $60,000, but put that in perspective, how there's other costs as well. Like I was planning to reopen. It was summer of 2021. My hot water tank started leaking in the restaurant, and we weren't open. And I ended up spending almost $3,500 to repair it, even though I didn't have any. There was no revenue coming in to look after that. So those are like just one small story of how many small business people have suffered and continue to suffer. And those who have made it out, fantastic. And I would encourage anyone, my background in hospitality, obviously, but when you consider where you're spending your dollars, think locally first, if you really can. It's not a soundbite. It's not advertising. It's something like those dollars that are spent in a community, they stay in the community. 2/3 of every dollar that's spent goes back into the community. And if you have to go somewhere else, just think of where those dollars are going, where the corporate offices are. Like how many local families are being served by the money spent in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit of a things for us to step up and do our part if we can. Now, so you've stepped up, you're in the legislature, you can add that perspective now of somebody who's been in the field of a small business. What is being done or what can be done on the legislative level? I know there's always talk about reducing red tape, but we've been hearing about that talk for many, many years now, and the red tape just never seems to quite actually reduce. Are there initiatives finally underway?
There are some initiatives underway. I've talked with many at length with Minister of Red Tape Reduction, Dale Nally. He's very active. I've also talked with Minister Rajan Sahani, Advanced Education, and Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, Minister Matt Jones. And there are some initiatives. Also, we do have Parliamentary Secretary of Small Business, Tani Yao. And we're just at the beginning stages. And prior to me getting into government, I don't know how things were, but I'm hopefully bringing more discussions around small business and how we can support small business initiatives. And looking forward to any input from your viewers.
Excellent. And then I guess further, since you're in there, I mean, we're always, it seems, just one breakout or one emergency or something away from a government being tempted to crack down and restrict or get in the way of business again. I can only imagine, at least hopefully we have more voices in government this time that would speak up and say, whoa, hold your horses. The cure may be worse than the disease if something else comes up in the future.
Correct. Yes. And I know not just myself. I mean, that's one of the main motivators that got me into the position I am, is to stand up for small business and say, no, we won't allow this as small business people. And I know that that our government shares that sentiment. There's also, and I'm stuck, I can't find the correct paperwork right now, but there is there's a petition that will be going around, a private petition to make sure that small business people can sign that and put it forward to government, and it'll be tabled in the fall legislature.
Great. And I mean, that's an important part. I mean, you got to, as a business owner, I know you're busy, business owners are busy. They got a million things on the go and everything, but they should communicate outwards with their local representative, make sure they've got some rapport going on. So if there are problems, I mean, government gets disconnected from people on the ground, and that's when things go bad, and it can happen. Get dome disease and whatnot. So making sure to reach out and remain engaged is really important.
I think that's great advice. To the small business owner out there who's listening or watching, really do get engaged. Contact at the municipal level, at the provincial level. Be involved, attend a constituency association meeting, have your voices heard, send an email, send a voicemail, get in contact with your local chamber of commerce. What I think happened, and this is, small business owners have their head down, they're in their lane doing what they do. And I can speak to that myself. I was never really involved in any government issues other than showing up and voting every 4 years. But we collectively have a loud voice as small business owners. But on our own, as we witnessed for a couple of years, we really didn't have a voice. And when we leaned on the people who we expected to advocate for us, that voice was no longer there.
Well, and it's good to know we have some government members who are, again, with that experience and willing to speak up if and when the challenge comes. And just that reminder to people, that's really what I wanted to bring you on, is, let people know it's not over for small businesses, not even by a long shot. I mean, it's better than it was a few years ago, but a lot, if they haven't gone broke, are still really struggling. So, try to help out your local business. And again, I guess, support your local representatives to keep them solvent.
Yeah, no, I encourage every small business owner, please share your stories. I'll be working with some initiatives, with all of our UCP MLAs it's not going to be a small business month, but to encourage, we'll be highlighting, small businesses in each constituency to support, as, because if we don't continue to support small business, we're going to lose small business, and we're going to turn around one day and what's left. I don't even want to imagine what that would look like, but we need to, this is a wave that's coming, and if it's not already here. So I'm sounding the alarm. Please go out and support your local small businesses.
And it's absolutely important. Before I let you go, one of our commenters, Shirley Gervais, said, many of us send emails to our elected officials and receive no responses. And that varies, depends on who your officials are and so on. But there is a cynicism, and often a lot of representatives aren't necessarily responsive. But you have been fantastically. So where can people, I guess, reach you and just follow you to see what you've been doing out there?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on all social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook a little bit. My direct email, is calgary.lougheed@assembly.ab.ca. And if you have an MLA, regardless of where they are, what allegiance they hold, and they're not being responsive, I don't want to take the burden and speak on their behalf, but please forward emails to me, and I could forward it to them and maybe try to get a response.
Great. Well, much appreciated. I really appreciate you coming in today and what you're doing in the legislature. perhaps, we can talk again down the road and see some of the progress, hopefully, in improving things for our small businesses in Alberta.
I would love that. No, thanks for the opportunity to give small business a voice. It's a weird, it's strange for me that I sit up in Edmonton, after I had dinner with the premier last night, and I was talking to my wife on the way home. I said, just how things changed, and I'm happy to be where I am. I'd be just as happy running my business, but I feel that, I'm here for a purpose, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be heard.
Much appreciated. Okay, well, we'll talk again soon.
You bet. Thanks, Corey.
Great, thank you. So that was, again, Calgary-Lougheed MLA Eric Bouchard. It's his first year in office, and yeah, he's hard at it. And again, I like that messaging. I know, and I understand what Shirley's saying. It can feel frustrating. You can feel like they aren't listening. It can feel like they're indifferent. And it doesn't matter which, even if you have an NDP MLA or whatnot, often, we can't speak for everyone. Often, though, they really do care. They might have a different ideology than you, but they really do want to hear from you. And they are concerned about the businesses. Sometimes you might even actually help them understand things a little better. So try to communicate with your representatives, as Mr. Bouchard said, on all three levels, municipal, federal, and provincial. It can only help. I mean, the worst that'll happen is they ignore you, but a lot of them pay more attention than people realize. And it's worth reaching out and communicating with them. So I appreciate him coming on, because, small business gets forgotten. Look, big business is important too, of course. So those big corporations, I know people don't like them, but that's how you get economies of scale, and you can buy products at Walmart for a good price and so on. But for your local community, plus, I believe most Canadians are employed by small businesses of under 100 employees. That's where the majority of us are working. So, but those are also the ones most vulnerable. They don't have a big capital pool to fall back on if times get tough. If something happens, it's very difficult. As Mr. Bouchard said, he was in the hospitality industry. And as I said, I owned a pub for 5 years. I tell you what, when hard times hit and you're in that industry, it doesn't matter how much you think your banker loves you, as nice as they are when you got your mortgage and your car loan and all your credit cards and everything with the bank. When you mention borrowing money for a restaurant or a pub, if you want to see a banker's butt snap shut harder than to crack walnuts, that's the way to go. They despise lending money to hospitality industry businesses. And it's a high risk. Fair enough, that's business. But that's also why they are so vulnerable. If you hit a low spot, it's not so easy as just going out and taking out a demand loan so you can ride out the tough times. Quite often, you just don't have it. And what happens then is a lot of business owners leverage themselves personally. They might refinance their home. They might cash their RRSPs. But again, it puts them in dire trouble if the business doesn't recover fast enough. And it still could be a viable business, but you get into that hole and you're trying to pay the interest and you're trying to keep up, and suddenly it comes down. So just reminding everybody, it's not over yet for a lot of the small businesses out there. The damage done by the bad policies, the restrictions during the pandemic is still being felt by a lot of people. Okay, I mentioned earlier I wanted to talk a bit about legacy media. Yeah, one of my favorite areas to bash. It's a bit self-serving, but it's important. Something I saw last night on Twitter, it comes out, or X, I should say. CTV puts out a headline. This is beautiful. Now, the headline says, terminally ill Palestinian prisoner dies after 38 years in Israeli custody. I'm going to tell you about a media term. It's called burying the lead. That's when you take a story and you actually put the most important parts of the story way deep down in the body of the story rather than having them up front and center. If you're writing news copy, you should actually kind of go in a descending order of the most important parts of the story and kind of get down to the details later. But when you bury the lead, you actually take the important part and bury it, and then just go on to the fluff and distractions to begin with. So yes, it is true. A terminally ill Palestinian prisoner did die after 38 years in Israeli custody. If you see nothing but that headline, and unfortunately a lot of people only read the headlines, you think that's terrible. Those darned Israelis keeping some poor man in jail for almost 40 years, and they died of old age. This is awful. This is awful. The part they forgot to mention is, why was this man in custody for 38 years? But instead, CTV was going on about Walid Daka was the longest imprisoned Palestinian currently in jail in Israel. Oh, those nasty Israelis. Well, let's talk about it. In 1984, this Walid Daka kidnapped 19-year-old Moshe Tamim when he got off a bus. And after he kidnapped him, he cut out Moshe's eyes, he castrated him, he slowly mutilated him, he tortured him almost to death before shooting him. That's why that walking piece of feces was in jail for 40 years. CTV neglected to mention that in their headline, okay? You can be critical of Israel. There's lots of room for it. You can be critical of Netanyahu. There's plenty to be critical. I really wish somebody less corrupt than him was leading Israel right now. But this kind of crap coming from our legacy media, this leading headline, making it sound like, and then I listened I torture myself. I listened to talk radio this morning and they were talking to some guest who's going on about how Israel's holding thousands and thousands of detainees and that's what they won't release in order, with Hamas to swap as a prisoner swap. They're trying to draw a moral equivalence to criminals who are in prison to the young women who were snatched up from a music festival by terrorists and have been raped mercilessly for the last 7 months. They're trying to say that's the same thing as the criminals, the murderers, the torturers that Israel has in prison right now. You know what? Israel probably has a few in there that shouldn't be there. Most countries, it seems, do manage to convict a few innocent people, but there's not 9,000 detainees. They're prisoners, they're crooks, they're murderers, they're rapists. Don't try to say that's the same as the hostages that the terrorists, and I'll say terrorists, even if CBC won't, the terrorists that Hamas took from that music festival. It's just sickening. It's sickening. Make a real case, you guys. Don't try to undercut what happened. See, that's not the first time for CTV. If you might remember a while back, there was an activist and she had Canadian ties. Her name was Vivian Silver. She was actually very pro-Hamas. She was very pro-Palestine, trying to help them out. Well, she got murdered. She was kidnapped and murdered on October 7th. And CTV came out there with this headline, Vivian Silver has died after being missing. That was their headline. The real headline is Vivian Silver was kidnapped by Hamas and murdered. But instead, no, she died. They made it sound like she went for a walk and got missing and maybe had a heart attack or something. Let's get some real coverage going on out there, guys. This is ridiculous. It's absurd. And we've got to be realistic about it. You can't draw these moral equivalences between these things. But the media, the legacy media, guys, that's why, again, self-serving, I know, keep supporting the independent ones. We aren't always necessarily right, but you need balance. You need more going on. And that example, like I said, with burying the lead with CTV, that's the way they can take news items, and they're not exactly giving you misinformation. They're just packaging it in a way so that you don't see the full information. Another one that came up as well, when there was the hostage swap, I can't remember her name offhand, but they showed these terrible pictures of this person released from an Israeli prison, and they're giving back to swap for some hostages with Hamas to try and free some of the people that Hamas kidnapped. And this woman, and her face is all burned, and she looked like a hot dog that had been on the barbecue way too long. Her fingers were all shriveled up and cooked. And of course, people were freaking and saying, look what happened to her in that Israeli prison. Again, context, look a little farther down the story, because people were assuming that she'd been burned and mutilated and tortured in an Israeli prison. No, it turns out she was a suicide bomber. Not a very good one, because she failed on a couple of levels. For one, she survived, so that's not a very good suicide bomber, though she did barbecue herself rather terribly. She was planning to go into the middle of a bunch of people and blow herself up, as suicide bombers are inclined to do. But she prematurely detonated, cooked herself pretty badly, and ended up in an Israeli prison, quite rightly so. But again, that's way down in the text. That's farther down in the story. Instead, they make it look like Israel was keeping this poor woman and had terribly abused her while she was in prison. Not the case in that case. Either way, CTV is just beyond the pale. It is terrible. All right, let's see. This is some bigger news in Alberta, and it's going to be interesting to watch this. This has been hitting the news a lot, too. And here shows some of the double standard. Again, listening to talk radio, I'm listening to these guys going on. Oh, here goes Danielle Smith, just fighting for the sake of fighting. And she's, going to be now stepping on municipal rights by perhaps bringing up a bill that might stop the federal government from bypassing the provincial government and going to municipalities. Well, for one, this is one of my favorite things to keep pointing out to people. Quebec has just such a policy already. Why is it always quite all right when Quebec asserts its provincial authority, but Albertans are always arseholes when they do? Why that double standard? Why is it wrong for Albertans to stand up for themselves against Ottawa, but it's all right for Quebec? There is a double standard in Canada, a huge one and a problematic one. And then we got a cynical prime minister who comes into Alberta. He does it to Saskatchewan. He does it in every province. He bypasses the local government that is in charge of that jurisdiction in areas like housing and things like that. He dangles the money for political points in front of municipalities, but he leaves the rest of it to the province. The province has to deal with the administration. The province has to deal with the fallout. And if they complain about it, he calls them all selfish, uncooperative jerks who want to cut off the money from their well-deserving citizens because they're trying to score political points. No, they're trying to stop a prime minister from using our own money to campaign for himself by trying to bribe citizens through the municipalities. So, I mean, think about who is upset by this legislation. Jody Gondek, yes, the worst mayor in Calgary in history. She's upset with it. So if Jody's upset with it, Smith's probably on the right track. They're not trying to say no to getting our tax dollars back from the federal government. They're trying to say, but we need to have our control of how we deal with that money when it gets here. It's not your job, Prime Minister Trudeau, to go directly to these municipalities like this, because their money always comes with strings. And we need government out of our face, not getting in. Speaking of which, though, you know, I mean, again, you listen to local media, you listen to activists, you listen to the rest. Oh, Alberta's terrible, it's awful. You know, they're abusing trans people, or you name it, whatever other garbage. Well, the numbers are really coming in interesting. You know, BC, here we go, Lotus Land, land of the woke, beautiful climate, great salmon fishing. You know, it's a good destination. Everybody should be moving to BC, right? Province to province, they'd be going to BC in hordes right now. I mean, Alberta's so intolerant, and we get cold weather and mosquitoes and all that. Well, the numbers are in. BC, interprovincial migration-wise, lost 8,600 people. 8,600 people moved out of BC. Said, nah, we're gone. They had net loss. BC's growing, but it's through immigration from outside of the country. Alberta gained 55,000 interprovincial migrants, people moving from other provinces to Alberta. If we're so terrible, why is everybody coming here? You know, we see the same thing down in the United States. It's been very interesting. You look at the hard left states, the blue states down there, the Democrat states. The worst of them, of course, are California and New York. Big centers. You know, they've got a lot of resources. They've got a lot of money in there. They got things going on. Yet guess what? They're losing people. People are moving out of those states like nobody's business. Where are they going? They're going to Texas. They're going to Florida. They're going to Tennessee. They're going to Republican states. They're going to places where you can prosper. They're going to places with smaller government. They're going to places that aren't woke, that aren't ridiculous, that aren't stupid like California, which is just going completely insane. California has raised the minimum wage for their fast food workers to $20 an hour. In California, 20 American dollars an hour, real dollars, not the Canadian peso. Guess what's already been happening? Thousands of fast food workers are getting laid off. Prices are shooting through the roof. Look, if you could end poverty by raising minimum wage, somebody would have done it by now. But people without an understanding of economics think it's a solution. It's a Band-Aid, and it's not a good one. It will help them for a very short time, the people who are at entry-level positions, because they'll get a raise from $15 an hour to $20 an hour. But guess what? Only 4 out of 5 got that because 1 out of 5 got laid off to cover it. And then they find out that as the prices of everything else go up, that $20 an hour doesn't buy what it used to. In fact, it's buying as much or less than the $15 an hour they had before. What you need is a strong economy. You need the natural raising of wages to draw people into work for you, not an artificial bar that's set through a minimum wage. It doesn't work. And then everybody all the way along the line gets raises, great, but it just leads to inflation. They just don't seem to understand. It doesn't get rid of the underlying problem with the poverty. The poverty was due to a bad economy. If you want a better economy, you need the government to get out of the bloody way. That's the way to do it, not get in there further. So yes, even though California has that $20 minimum wage, do you think people are all rushing to move out to California to cross-country ski in the poop on the San Francisco streets? Yeah, that's how bad it is there now. No. They're leaving California. They're running as hard as they can to states with much lower minimum wages, because anybody with ambition and a work ethic can do a heck of a lot better. They can buy a home a lot cheaper. They can make good money, and government is out of their face. And it's not as woke and ridiculous and insane. Another thing with BC, the BC-Alberta thing going on, and we're watching that, and I'm watching with interest, is, of course, the addiction epidemic, and it's hitting both provinces, and neither province is having a good time trying to get it under control. It's a catastrophe in all ends. Both provinces are dealing with record overdoses. I won't talk about drug toxicity and all that enablest crap, trying to make it sound like we don't have an addiction problem, and it's just that they aren't getting good enough drugs. They're overdosing. They're overdosing and they're dying in both provinces. But Alberta's really pushing on a treatment-focused agenda. So there's the announcement of that Canadian Centre for Recovery Excellence to work on best practices in mental health and addiction services. That's great. We really need treatment spaces. We need better treatment. We need to get addicts into treatment as soon as they're ready. That's the best course we have. I'm not wholly against a degree of safe consumption or harm mitigation. Yes, we need to keep the addicts alive as long as possible to get them into recovery. But it's not an and. And the enableists won't stop at safe consumption. They're a cult. They're loonies. They also say, well, we've also got to give them drugs. We got to let them take the drugs in the hospitals. We got to let them take the drugs in the playgrounds. I wish I was kidding. In BC, it's a constitutional right, a charter right to take drugs in a playground. Again, you can't smoke a cigarette there, but you could shoot some heroin. This is wrong. We're going to watch, and I'm not going to dance for glee if and when I believe the Alberta model succeeds much better than BC, and eventually it's going to be a long game. We'll see the addiction and the overdoses going down while BC's continue to rise, because BC's will continue to rise, and it's still horrible to behold. I just hope that Alberta can turn into an example to show a better path. I mean, there's no magic bullet. There's no simple way to deal with this. But I think Alberta's going on the right course. And I'm speaking as a recovering alcoholic. I'm familiar with addiction, guys. Not in every aspect of it, but I'm familiar. All right. Well, that's filled us up for today, guys. Thank you all for tuning in. Lots to cover. Lots we did cover. Be sure to come back again tonight. The pipeline's going to be on. As I said, we're going to break down a few more issues. Share these links. Take out a subscription. We appreciate it. Let's keep independent media independent so we can keep getting the real truth out there, or at least my version of it. So thanks for tuning in. We will see you all again next week at this time.